Welcome back, everybody, to the final session of PRWeek Convene, communicating in the coronavirus era. I'm Steve Barrett again, editorial director of PRWeek. Hope you've enjoyed the first two sessions. Remember, if you missed any of the earlier content, you can watch it on demand, and it's actually going to be available for the next 12 months, so you can catch up on anything you missed. Earlier in the event, we covered purpose and employee engagement. In our final session, we're going to talk about crisis communications during the COVID-19 era, and we're delighted to have Kylie Wright-Ford, who's the CEO of RepTrak, with us to talk about this. Kylie is RepTrak is a company that rates company reputations, and you might have known them as the Reputation Institute, and they recently rebranded to RepTrak. And Kylie joined RepTrak in 2018 after 3 years at the executive membership company World 50. Prior to that, she was part of the leadership team at GLG, where she led more than $150 million in revenue as the leader of the Americas client retention team and co-head of global client service. She started her career at Goldman Sachs. So Kylie, welcome to the webcast. Great to have you with us.
Delighted to be here, Steve, and good afternoon and morning, everyone, from wherever you are in the world.
Yeah, I think we have got people from all over the world. So yeah, for sure. Let's just set the session up. So coronavirus, we know it's a crisis unlike any other that's ever been experienced. Every brand, corporation and organization is assessing what it's got to do to stay operational, protect its reputation and look after its core stakeholders. So we're going to talk about that with Kylie and explain the importance of smart and nimble reputation management and demonstrating empathy and authenticity while maintaining as much business as usual as possible. But first of all, Kylie, tell us about this rebranding during the crisis, pretty much, when you sort of transitioned from the Reputation Institute to RepTrak. Talk us through that.
Yeah, certainly I'd be glad to, because crisis is all about making decisions and then communicating them calmly. And we had been planning to transition from the Reputation Institute, which has been our name since 1997, to the RepTrak company as a nod to our core model. The RepTrak model is very well known. I'm sure I'm among your audience, but certainly among the big global 2000 companies and beyond. And we wanted to show that we're really moving forward. We're more tech-oriented than we have been in the past. And that reputation is one aspect of what we do, but brand, purpose, looking at ESG and beyond is like a much broader remit. So naturally, internally, people started to question whether we should relaunch. It was just a week and a half ago that we did in the middle of this crisis, given so many other things going on and clients being, very, very both valuable and in terms of their networking with each other, but also needing us a lot. And my view was, in crisis, Steve, you got to have ice in the belly, warmth in the heart, which means make decisions and be honest about what you do and don't know, but use this as a galvanizing moment. And I knew that we wouldn't be looking for any PR ourselves out of the rebrand or anything, but it was a galvanizing moment for our employees, and that was super important. It went very smoothly, and we're very proud to come out the other side.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting case study. Yeah, you do have to do business as usual as well and get on with things. And if there is no good reason not to do it, then go for it, I guess. Questions of Kylie and about this topic, just enter them into the module, and I will be monitoring those and asking them in the last 10 minutes or so. But RepTrak is a pretty good name, isn't it? Because you're tracking reputation every day. And at a time like this, things are even more complicated than ever, and they're moving even faster than ever. So talk us through that dynamic at the moment and generally.
Right, absolutely. So you nailed it when you said more complicated than ever. I would also say the thing I'm most commonly saying at the moment when I'm speaking to clients and CEOs and other leaders is it's also really situational right now as to what to do. So it's complicated because there's a lot of interplay between how we think about our products and services, our supply chains, and our employees, and then our communities, of course, that we work in. And on top of that, all the communicators in the room have to work out how to have a strategy to prioritize the channels they use and how they speak and what they say. So super complicated, way beyond anything I saw in previous crises, where there was a clear issue. Take the financial crisis, you could identify who was most at fault in your own eyes, whereas this one, we are all truly in it together. So it's complicated. It's also situational because things are unraveling in certain geographies at a different rate, and then they're recovering at a different rate. And so we went into field early in Italy to collect some data around what we were seeing there. And we have very strong relationships in Italy and are proud to work with some of the finest companies there. And we went into field, and what we found was just super practical communications and super practical actions were what was needed. And so things like giving a face mask to your employee could overall in aggregate lift your reputation by 5 points, which is huge. So that is really practical and beyond things we've seen in the past where people want companies to be good for society and good to their employees. Now, as things are changing, people are actually more focused on loss of income and so forth. And we went into the field in the US in March and again in the last couple of weeks. And we find now consumers are more focused on discounts than they were initially. So communicators need to keep adapting, know it's complicated, target in on their priorities by looking at what's going on in the geography they're in right now and what industry they're in. So it's like a triage of what industry, what geography, what stakeholder matters the most right now, prioritize, know that it's going to be different next week.
Yeah, I can tell you that Camille Wellerchuk at ATB Financial really liked your ice in the belly and warmth in the heart line. So that's one great takeaway from this, if nothing else. So you've done some research and you mentioned it, I think, there. But were there any other big findings that jumped out of it that you think are relevant to the discussion?
Certainly. One thing that was really big for us and for anyone who's the guardian of the reputation of a company, which is the chief communication officer historically and increasingly other leaders in a C-suite and ultimately the CEO, is this is extraordinarily different. Our data is showing a jump like we haven't seen in quite some time at the driver level. What I mean by the driver is there's some core drivers of reputation. We know what they are. We've mathematically proven how they can lead to business impact, and workplace went from the 7th most important driver to the 4th most important in 2 months. It is a huge jump. The piece of the driver that actually decreased in importance in terms of explaining reputational risk or opportunity was actually products and services. So again, that jumped out at me because in this kind of environment, we expected, products and services, ability to get access to your groceries, etc., to be maintained, but actually the workplace became the most important. The other thing I would say that surprised me just recently, Steve, coming out of the US fielding, is the emphasis that the public is having on companies helping the federal government. Companies are benefiting from an increase in trust right now. And when you think about what we've seen in terms of trust deterioration since the last crisis and companies were not given the benefit of the doubt, seeing a rebound like that and a willingness to listen to companies and willingness to be assured by them is a really positive step forward. And the public is asking for them to help the government. The other thing is just the collaboration across companies. It was really great to see some of the tech companies get together to try and help find solutions. The pharma companies are working together. And they are typically two areas that don't have great reputation if you're speaking at a very generalized level. There are outliers, of course, but that's really nice to see that companies are really banding together.
Yeah, for sure. And the CEO is playing a big role in that, isn't he or she? They're almost becoming the chief communications officer of the organization and demonstrating their leadership through great communication. Talk a bit about that and how you're monitoring that.
Absolutely. And we monitor CEO reputation as well as company reputation, and being a responsible leader is a huge driver of a CEO reputation, which has positive flow-on effects, as most people in the room will know, to their overall company reputation. The big thing that we're seeing here is any CEOs who are trying to bolster their personal brand instead of focusing on the employees, the communities, and the customers they serve, will find it tough going. And people are smart. They see through some of the messaging that they're getting right now. But CEOs who are very authentic and talk about things like paid time off for all employees, 65% of the public that we went to in one of our studies said that the CEO should be communicating and doing the right thing by their employees in this way. And then also pivoting the business is very important. CEOs to actually talk about and think about. So things like the car companies going into building ventilators, the tech companies getting together, CEOs really should be speaking about that, and they should be speaking frequently. I personally have gone from weekly briefings with the whole company to video briefings just to make sure people don't have Zoom fatigue, but the flow of information is incredibly important for people.
Yeah, for sure. So apologies if anyone heard my doorbell ringing in the background there. That's the home delivery and the perils of this lockdown. So sorry about that, but it's a fact of life, I'm afraid. So yeah, are there any CEOs in particular that you've thought, or companies, brands that you thought, yeah, they're doing a brilliant job. You know, they really have stepped up. They're doing the right thing. They're engaging their employees, and they're really communicating authentically and well.
Yes. Oh, there's been so many. I'm a student of leadership, Steve, and I wrote a book actually in 2016 and 17 about like the way leaders have to pivot now that we're in this world where technology has disrupted the way that we interact. And I mean, just look at us all today here, 1,000 or more of us sharing this conversation, and where demographics have changed so much. That CEOs really need then the way they interact and be more enlightened, but also just be more relevant and authentic. I like the CEOs who use plain language. I mean, one of my favorites, if you haven't ever followed Chuck Robbins at Cisco, is he's great CEO. It's a great company. Now, you know, there's so much anxiety out there about jobs and so forth. There's so much noise about these no layoff pledges and sharing the pain and so forth. And he just comes out in plain language and says, it's silly for us to lay people off because our business is not being disproportionately affected. Why would we do that? Don't worry. And just that sort of plain language and absolutely confronting the deepest fear that people have is really important. Now, of course, there's other companies who have cash flow problems and so forth and don't have that luxury. But whatever business you're in or whatever position you're in, false precision is not going to help. Plain language is, and being true to your values and your style is. I really love what Allstate, State Farm, and USAA are doing in the insurance industry. I think Kroger's done really well. Ford and GM have had a lot of credit for what they've been doing. And in terms of messaging, I was on the Whirlpool website the other day because your website has just become more critical than ever in terms of educating. And 72% of the public think you should be informing them through your website about COVID-19. And the language used was just really great. It was, we're working around the clock and around the world to serve you, our employees, and our customers to get you goods. It was something along those lines. And so they're the sort of things that I think about, Steve, like let your values guide you, remind people what your values are, use plain language, and don't use false precision because no one knows exactly what's going on right now.
Yeah, so using their dishwasher, their washing machine a lot more. They're cooking at home a lot more. So you're looking up the manuals online. You're looking for information. It's a great point. There's another question here from Camille from ATB. She's talking about the CEO. She says, how do you know when it's the right time to tool down the use of your CEO as the voice of crisis to your company? Because you can do the daily communiques, and we've seen that from, you know, politicians. And they're very important in terms of customer service, but sometimes they can become a negative thing as well. They were doing one a day, and they've transitioned to 3 times a week. How would you monitor? How would you manage that sort of dynamic?
Yeah. So first of all, a great CHRO at this time is really a critical partner for you, and so they will have employee engagement pulse checks to be able to leverage. We track employee reputation all the time and future employer reputation to get messages on what's going on. So you can use data providers to get a quick read on what's going on with employees. But I would say look to what their values are and what would be consistent with them. For example, if you're someone that communicates all the time and freely and uses Twitter and so forth, keep it up. Don't tail it back because anxiety is very high. If this is unusual for you, I would start to put some other leaders up front. So follow a cadence that doesn't actually raise the anxiety. If they're seeing too much of you, it might be like there's something we don't know and the other shoe is about to drop. And I do think this moment in time for leadership teams is going to be pivotal. We can really have great alignment with leadership teams right now if they're really leveraging each other and showing a consolidated front. Alignment across a company can get you incredible lifts in the future and can really make or break your reputation in terms of how you come out of this. So use them with what's consistent with the past, use multiple channels. Some CEOs, and in fact, the New Zealand Prime Minister uses Facebook Live and things like that to communicate. And so if that's natural to them, do it. And then tail back when you get that employee engagement beyond what you need right now.
It's nice to see an Aussie praising I like that.
I know.
But she has been incredible as a leader and lots of great lessons there. She's just totally on point and empathetic. And actually, it has resulted in a very low number of infections in the country through actions as well. So that's a good point. What about talking about the CEOs and their interaction with government as well? Some of them, we've seen stories recently about companies applying for stimulus funds and getting a bit of blowback, and people saying, well, this is really for smaller businesses. And I think Shake Shack was one which actually decided to give the money back. And they gave it back. But really, you could ask, why did they apply in the first place? How do you navigate that as a leader and a CEO? Karen Doyne brought that point up.
Yeah, I think that's a really, it's an interesting point because it is very complicated at the moment and we don't always know the cash flow situation of companies. And so what's going on behind the scenes in terms of their run rate and their ability to survive might be something that we don't know. So it's not so easy to diagnose as they are big or small. There are plenty of big companies with serious debt problems right now, and the bankruptcies have been relatively low and surprising in my opinion. So first of all, I would say is don't judge too harshly on those moments because leading at a time like this, you are cautioned by everyone to make sure you have liquidity and make sure the company is stable. And as a CEO, you're doing everything you can to do that. Again, I want to come back to it's complicated and it's not just big or small right now. It's like the sort of dynamics behind the scenes might be as important as what's in front of the scenes. But I do think that they were pretty transparent about it. So from a communication standpoint, they came out, they owned it, and they moved on. I think that's great.
Yeah, no, it's an unprecedented crisis to navigate, for sure. Have you seen in your research, Kylie, Mary Lynn Carver asks, a different drop in product services as a reputation between different industries? Is the data telling us anything about that?
Yes, so the industry analysis is really interesting. And it's interesting because some of the industries that traditionally don't have such an easy time reputationally have fared pretty well. Take, for example, telecommunications. If you looked at the average industry reputation for telecommunications, it usually tracks below retail or consumer or F&B. And there are many reasons for that. But they've actually done a really nice job. I was looking at a Canadian telco, TELUS, who just had a really light and friendly sort of social presence at the outset for international travelers, saying we'll waive all your roaming fees. And they did a really nice job. I'm Australian, as you mentioned, and my 18-year-old son called me to tell me that Optus in Australia had, given him a break on how much he had to pay. And so companies like that are in reputationally challenged industries are doing quite well. And pharma doesn't always fare well on the reputation front, but again, they're getting a lift from it. So that's really interesting. Retail is the most polarizing. So thinking about companies that are doing well and having a tougher time of it, the two companies that get most called out in our most recent study are Walmart and Amazon in a polarizing way. The polarizing comes about because A, people are looking for critical products and they're not on the shelves sometimes, and B, workplace is highly scrutinized there, and they have big workforces that are very accessible to direct communications with their families and friends and so forth. So there's some industry trends I'd touch on, that this has upended the way an industry is viewed reputationally right now. So our next study will be fascinating.
Yeah. No, it certainly will. And a company where the CEO's got a lot of plaudits for communicating well is Marriott, and Arne Sorensen, the CEO there, who's going through a difficult personal time with illness, but he's in a really challenging and challenged industry. But he just basically came out and he did have to make some tough decisions, but he was very much praised for the way he communicated it in an authentic and plain speaking way. What other sort of advice would you offer to companies operating and communicating in industries like that, like travel, cruise industry, when the reality is still not that positive?
Yeah, so first of all, showing that you're in control of this, even if it's only in control of your own decisions, is critical, because people are looking for cues to give them a sense of calm and or some sense of direction. But like I said before, false precision won't help. I think in this instance, like actually being honest about what you do and you don't know, and the fact that we're making 100% of our decisions with about 50% of the information that you would usually like to have, is really important. And telling personal stories of the people that they've met, the customers they've seen, and the employees that have been impacted by COVID-19 is a way to show that authenticity. But again, back to the values, just speaking from my own experience of like how important they have been right now. And I can't speak to Marriott values, but I bet if you went back and looked at them, they would be aligned with the message that they're giving right now. One of our values is just be honest. And so when people say, can you assure me that XYZ, the thing that's popping up in my head is the value of be honest. If I can't assure, I have to say, I cannot assure you of that. What I do know is this. And so I think that's very difficult. One of my sort of favorite former CEOs of a company is the former CEO of Mattel. And he used to just be so disarming and just say, look, I'm sorry that this has happened. My name is Bob. You shouldn't have to worry about your family at a time like this. And you do. So, let's talk. And I really love that, again, plain language, authentic way to communicate.
Yeah, that one word, honesty, and being honest is such a great piece of advice, but it's so difficult to do, isn't it? There's such a, although it shouldn't be, but it is, due to all sorts of complicated factors. But it's one of the Page principles, I think, and, that govern communications, and I think it's so important. A question, I was talking to a CCO yesterday, and they've got their CEO long plan changeover happening next week. And, that kind of has to happen for corporate governance. CEO reaches a certain age and they have to do the transition. Someone else here is also navigating a change of leadership with a CEO leaving in May. How do you protect, and reduce employee anxiety during a time like this and protect the reputation of the whole company when you are going through a pretty major change there? That CEO is the top executive in the company.
Right. So this is where you have a team. Don't forget it. Hopefully it's a great team in both those instances, but that is, for me, like the most important lever to pull in this instance. Now, of course, as a CEO, you need to sharpen your mind and make decisions. And of course, that's going to cause anxiety. But the decisions that you make don't have to be negative ones. They can be deciding timeframes. They can be deciding pivots for the company that don't necessarily lead to the conclusion that it will mean, an adverse outcome. I actually think it's a really interesting time to become a CEO, and I think that if I was stepping into a new role as a CEO now, I would embrace it as like the opportunity to have my mind so sharp on what matters and just filter out all of the noise of what doesn't. Right now, it's very clear what matters: looking after your employees, the workplace, being ethical, honest, and transparent. And you can worry about all the product innovation and everything else you have to do next year. So that's how I would think about it.
No, I think that's great advice, and I think in a way, these crises do help you reset, don't they? And they help you really decide what's important and go back to your values, because things can get really overcomplicated, and that's great advice. Yeah. And what about advice for communications professionals in this environment, both advising the CEO in-house or on the agency side? What's the best way to if you're an agency, say, convince the client that honesty is the best policy, because that's often quite a challenge. That's a question from Kyle Rosenbaum. What sort of advice would you offer there?
Right. So honesty implies some judgment around what is honest and what's not. So there's in terms of like every CEO and every executive team wants to be honest. So I'm sure there's no one saying I don't want to do that, but they're thinking about what's the level of disclosure that's right now, because it is very complicated. So I would say, like, first of all, make sure they're not bland. Steve, you asked me if I was willing to talk about things that I've seen that I didn't love in terms of the way companies were responding. And to be honest, I think most companies are doing a really nice job, even the really distressed ones. Take Delta, and I'm a huge Delta flyer and so forth. Their employees are rallying around them, and their communication has been amazing, and the customer experience has been incredible, even though they're in dire straits in terms of like their decline in travel. Not as a business, I'm not commenting on that, but decline in travel. We have the lowest airline travel we've seen since 1954. Just think about that for a moment. And then you have this company who's been really proactive and amazing. And then on the other side, I was reading some communication materials from a company in the insurance industry, and it was so bland to the point that it just felt tone deaf for what was going on in people's families. It was along the lines of, we've been around for this long, a long time, and we've got a good executive team in place, instead of starting like the example I gave you of Whirlpool saying we're working really hard for you. So don't be bland would be the first thing I'd say. The second thing I'd say is in Italy, we had some staggering results around the impact of communications that are shared by employees. Employees are the channel right now. So if you can get your client over the hump on, it's the level of disclosure and honesty that they can give right now and how to put that, and then put it in the hands of the employees, you'll have much more impact, as opposed to days when we're looking at paid media and other strategies that clearly just have a very different dynamic right now.
Yeah, Kylie, I think that's great advice and a really brilliant point to end the session. Employee engagement has become more and more important over the last few years, and companies have started to realize that it's more than internal communications now, it's employee engagement, and that's come through the whole of this crisis and these sessions. So really, thank you so much for being with us. Really appreciate your time and dialing in and sharing your expertise.
It was my pleasure, Steve, and we'll follow up and provide some information so that you can download on the website, and thank you so much for hosting us today.
That's a pleasure. Yeah, there's all sorts of assets you can download in the platform, and you can, as I said, catch up if you missed any of it. But on behalf of PR Week and our audience, thank you to you for joining us. I've got this vision of hundreds of people out there working from home, dialing into this. It's quite cool in a way. I know it's not a cool situation, but it's great to be talking to you. I want to thank Zeno, Aflac, and RepTrak for supporting today's content. And our speakers specifically, much gratitude to them for taking time from their busy schedules to share their experience. We really appreciate your audience participation. Lots of great questions, and we will get the ones that weren't answered over to our partners for them to get back to you directly. Hope you got as much out of this as you were hoping. It's going to be available on demand for a year, as I said, the webcast, so you can revisit it and tell others about it. And you can check back on prweek.com for future webcasts. But on behalf of PRWeek and myself, thank you so much for attending this webcast, Communicating in the Coronavirus Era. Please, I wish you all the best. Genuinely do. Stay safe and healthy out there. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Please, try and take a break from work. I know we're all tempted to do these 16-hour days, but we're covering the industry at PRWeek, and we're really there to support you and provide content to help you. So have a great rest of the day, and look forward to being able to meet up with you in person after this is over. Thanks so much for joining us.